It's the 10th of July 2001 in a quiet suburb of Sydney, Australia. Just before midnight, an emergency operator takes a call from a young man. He is sobbing. He can barely get the words out. He tells the operator that he's come home to his family house, his dream home, the one his parents built from nothing, and he's found his father on the floor. He says they are all bleeding. Police race to 6 Collins Street, North Ryde. Inside they find a family annihilated. A father, a mother and an 18-year-old girl who had celebrated her birthday just the day before. And standing in the middle of it all is a sole survivor, the son, 20 years old, polite, baby-faced and devastated. In the days that follow, he will beg the public for help. He will offer a reward for any information leading to the murderers. And at the funeral, in front of 100 mourners, he will stand up and sing. Australia's heart broke for Sef Gonzales. It shouldn't have. This is the case of the Gonzales family murders. This is True Crime with Emma. You can find my podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can watch the full documentary on YouTube and TikTok. If you like my content, please feel free to like, subscribe and comment. To understand this case, you have to know what this family had already survived. Sef Gonzales was born in September 1980 in Baguio City in the Philippines to Teddy and Loiva Gonzales. Teddy was a lawyer. Loiva helped run the family's business interests. 3 years later, their daughter was born, Claudine, and the family of 4 lived comfortably. Right up until the 16th of July 1990, when a massive earthquake tore through the island of Luzon. The family's home and their business, a newly built 40-room hotel, collapsed into rubble. And somewhere beneath that rubble was 9-year-old Sef. According to accounts from the disaster, it was Teddy who pulled his own son from the wreckage. Whatever else you learn about the family in the next half an hour, keep that image in mind. A father digging his boy out of a collapsed building with his own hands. The Gonzales family decided to start again, and they moved to Australia. And honestly, their story over the next decade is a migrant dream done right. Teddy requalified as a lawyer in a brand new country, which, believe me, is no small thing. He built a successful law firm specializing in immigration, helping other families do exactly what he had done. The family were devout Catholics, pillars of the Filipino Sydney community, and by the year 2000 they had built themselves a beautiful 4-bed family home at 6 Collins Street, North Ryde. From the rubble in the Philippines to a dream home in the suburbs of Sydney in just 10 years. But households like this one often run on expectation. Teddy and Loiva had nearly lost everything in that earthquake, and they wanted their children to be safe in the way that they understood safety. That came from education, profession, and respectability. Court reports describe them as loving but strict, with high hopes pinned firmly on their son. They wanted Sef to put aside his music and his singing and become a lawyer or a doctor like his father. And that is where the cracks begin to form, because Sef Gonzales was about to become 2 very different people. Here's the Sef Gonzales that the world saw. A charming, loving, kind man. A devoted son and big brother. A singer, genuinely that was his passion, performing at church and community events. He worked part-time at his dad's law firm. He was polite, presentable, the kind of boy that other parents point at and say, "Why can't you be more like him?" Now here's the Sef Gonzales that everyone found out about in the courtroom. By 2001, his life was slowly falling apart. He started a medical science degree but dropped out after 2 years because he was failing at it. He switched to law, following the lawyer dream that his father had become, but he was failing that too, badly enough that he was at risk of being thrown out. But rather than be honest with his parents and tell the truth, Sef did what he always did. He lied. He falsified school reports, made fake grades to show them, and according to later accounts, the lying went so much further than that. He reportedly told people that he had cancer when he didn't. He made out that he was a successful businessman, a model and a singer on the rise. One account details a fan website all about Sef, supposedly set up by an admirer. Later it was found out that Sef made this website himself. I'm not sure we can verify every single story ourselves, but the picture painted in court was consistent. This was a young man building a fantasy version of himself, and the fantasy was starting to cost more than what he could pay. Because in a house that small, secrets don't keep, and the person that found him out was his little sister. Claudine Gonzales was 17, hard-working, studying hard in her final years of school. By every account, the child who actually was what Sef only pretended to be. And when Claudine discovered her brother's forged results, she told their parents. Teddy and Loiva were furious, and their response hit Sef hard. They threatened to take away his privileges, including his dream car, which was a green Ford Fiesta. Now I know what you're thinking, a Ford Fiesta isn't exactly a dream car, but to Sef it was something more. It was independence, it was status, it was the props of this fake life that he had built. Reports from the trial add that the threats went further. His allowance and potentially his inheritance itself were on the line. On top of all of that, Sef and his mother had been clashing over a girlfriend Loiva didn't approve of. And by 2001, that relationship had fallen apart too. So take stock of where this 20-year-old is. He's failing at his education. He's been dumped by his girlfriend. He faces the loss of his car, his money, and his standing as the golden son. And in his mind, facing the loss of his family's fortune. His parents' estate was later estimated at around $1.5 million Australian dollars, plus property back in the Philippines. Most people in that position sit their parents down and have a very uncomfortable conversation. Sef Gonzales started researching poisons. This is the part of the case for me that ends any argument to say that Sef reacted in a spur of rage, because he had been researching how to murder his family for months. He began researching poisons, even seeds from toxic plants, which he would try and order over the internet. Prosecutors argued that he would slowly poison his family and later state that it was some kind of food that was contaminated. And to build that cover story, police said he wrote anonymous letters to a food company, to the police, to quarantine authorities, trying to whip up a scare about contaminated food products as though a poisoner was at large in the community. Remember those letters, they are going to matter later. And this is part of the case that genuinely chills me. A week before Loiva is murdered, she is admitted to hospital for food poisoning. She was treated, she recovered, and then she went back home to the same place that her son lived. Did Sef poison his own mother as a trial run? He was never charged with that specific act, so I have to be careful here. But at sentencing, the judge found that Sef had it in mind to kill his parents from the time he began researching poisons, months before that July. And the jury convicted him not just of 3 murders, but of a 4th charge, threatening product contamination. The poison plot wasn't a theory, it was on the charge sheet. But poison, it was seen, was too slow, too uncertain, and over time, according to the police, Sef lost patience with it. And so we come to the 10th of July 2001. It's a Tuesday, the day after Claudine's 18th birthday. Let's just sit with that for a second. She turned 18 on the Monday. Her whole adult life was just one day old. I'm going to walk you through this day hour by hour in the exact way that the court reconstructed it. It's distressing, but it matters, because the timeline is exactly what proves that this was not an explosion of temper. It was calculated, controlled, and planned. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Sef leaves his father's law firm and drives home. He knows exactly his family's schedule. His sister is at home studying in her bedroom. His mother is out and his father is still at work. They will all come home one by one. That is the plan. At 4:30 p.m, Sef takes a baseball bat from his car and 2 knives from the kitchen block in the family kitchen, and he walks into his sister's bedroom. Claudine is at her books, and what happens next I'll describe only as far as the court record does, because she deserves to be more than the details of her death. The court found that her brother tried to strangle her, struck her about the head with a bat at least 6 times, and then stabbed her repeatedly. The cause of death was a combined effect of all three. There is no version of this that is quick, and no version that is anything other than overwhelming, deliberate force against a teenage girl by the person she'd grown up trusting most. And then this is the part I find the hardest to comprehend. Sef waits in that house with his sister's dead body for over an hour. He is waiting for his mother to arrive home. At 5:30 p.m, Sef Gonzales comes home. This is the woman who survived an earthquake, emigrated to Australia, built an entirely new life for her family, and just a week before had come out of hospital. As she walks through the door, her son attacks her with knives, stabbing her in the face, neck, chest, and abdomen. The court record notes one final detail I won't dwell on: an injury inflicted to her throat after she had already died. Rage or staging or both, only one person knows. And then Sef sits and waits again. He has now murdered his mother and his sister, and he is sitting in the house, in the dark, waiting for his father to come home. Now, at around 6 p.m, something happens that I think about constantly with this case. There's a knock, a visitor. It's Sef's sister, so Sef's aunt. She has arrived with her son. She can see Sef's and Sef's car in the driveway, but the house is dark. It's silent. And for a family that have 6 dogs, this seems incredibly unusual. She looks inside the house and sees movement. Someone is moving around in that dark, silent home, but is refusing to answer the door. That would have been Sef. She considers for a moment going through the garage door, but decides to leave with her son instead. That decision probably saved both her and her son's life. It's a decision that probably haunts her still to this day. At about 6:50 p.m, Sef Gonzales returns home from the law firm that his son Sef had left 3 hours earlier. Teddy is attacked immediately as he enters the home. And Teddy, the man who fought to dig his son out of the rubble of the earthquake, fights back. The court record is explicit that he had defensive wounds. He fought for his life against his own son, and he lost. The stab wounds to his neck, chest, back, and abdomen pierced his lung, his heart, his spine. By 7 o'clock that evening, the entire Gonzales family is dead, except one. And what does this survivor do? He gets to work. He changes, showers, hides the knives, disposes of his clothes and his size 7 trainers that he was wearing, and then he picks up a can of spray paint and begins to write across the walls of his family's home racist messages, words to the effect of "fuck off Asians" and KKK. Sef Gonzales, a Filipino immigrant faking a white supremacist hate crime against his own murdered family to point police anywhere but at him. Then he drives to his friend's house and the two of them head into Sydney's city centre, where they have dinner at Planet Hollywood and begin to play arcade games. Whilst his entire family lie dead in his home, he is out having dinner and gaming with his friends. Later that evening, he drops his friend back off at home and then makes his way to Collins Street. This is when, at 11:48 p.m, he makes that emergency phone call, sobbing and appearing to be heartbroken, a devastated son who's returned from a night out to find his family annihilated. What follows in the next few weeks may be the most brazen public appearances that I've ever covered by a killer on this channel. Sef runs to his neighbours and is in apparent hysterics. When the police arrive, he is a picture of just shattered grief. He then proceeds to take that grief on tour. He makes television appearances, offers rewards. He even calls a press conference where, according to reporting at the time, he criticises the Australian public for not caring enough about the murder of an Asian family. Think about the nerve of that. He sprayed the racist graffiti himself and then is publicly shaming the country for racism he invented. And then on the 20th of July comes the moment this case is remembered for. At the combined funeral for Teddy, Sef and Claudine, in front of a packed church, Sef delivers the eulogy. And then he sings, He performs One Sweet Day, the Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men ballad about losing loved ones and meeting them again in heaven. Mourners wept. Some reportedly felt, even then, that something about it was off. A performance where there should have been a person. If you take one image away from this episode, make it that one, because everything Sef ever wanted was in that church. An audience, a stage, sympathy, the spotlight at last entirely his. And behind the scenes, within days of the murders, he visited the family's accountant to ask about his inheritance. He was, as the apparent victim of a crime, also in line for a $15,000 victim's compensation payment. He moved into a flat in Chatswood. He put a deposit on a Lexus worth $173,000, telling the dealership his inheritance would cover it. It was claimed at trial that he traded in his parents' cars and pawned his mother's jewellery, and according to one account presented in the case, he told relatives he had a brain tumour and asked his godmother in the Philippines for $190,000 for surgery. She didn't pay. There was, of course, no tumour. The grieving son was shopping. So how was he caught? Because in July 2001, remember, the theory was that it was a robbery or a hate crime because of the graffiti. This is how that theory died, piece by piece. First, the scene itself never added up. There was no forced entry, nothing of value was taken. There was even cash left on the side that wasn't taken by these supposed robbers. The killings also spanned over 3 hours. Now, no burglar is going to stay in a home for 3 hours. They're not going to know who's coming home when. Why would they do that? It didn't make sense. And that graffiti was on the wall, but the family were attacked one by one over hours in an ambush pattern that only makes sense if the killer knew exactly who was coming home and when. Second, Sef himself never added up. Detectives noticed the strange flatness underneath the theatrics. His account of that night kept shifting. Claims about performing CPR that didn't fit the scene, and on the emergency call, he'd spoken as though he knew about all of the bodies when, by his own story, he'd only found his father. Small slips, but murder cases are built out of small slips. So the police quietly turned the investigation around. A strike force was formed. Sef's internet history was pulled, his phone calls were recorded, and in a very clever move by the police, one member of the police team went undercover and befriended Sef, staying close to him for months. Then the physical evidence started to speak. Paint found on Sef's clothing matched the spray paint used for the graffiti. A shoebox in his bedroom matched the size 7 trainers whose prints were found at the scene, trainers that had conveniently vanished. And then his alibi collapsed. Twice. Initially, Sef claimed that he was just driving around town in his car and then he eventually met up with a friend. However, police confirmed due to various cameras that Sef's car remained in that drive the whole time. They also had Sef's aunt as a witness. When she arrived at the home at 6 p.m, she explicitly remembers seeing Loiva's and Sef's car in the driveway. So alibi number 2. Sef then said, "Oh no, I made all of that up because I was embarrassed. What I was actually doing was I got a taxi to a brothel." However, this didn't add up either. When the police began to investigate it, the taxi driver could not confirm picking up anyone from that address. And the brothel's name that he gave and the woman he was with, the brothel confirmed that that woman was not working that night and they had no history of Sef ever arriving. He kept spinning. An email surfaced implicating a business rival of his father's. It was fabricated, the court found, by Sef. The following May, there was even a staged break-in attempt at his new home, as if the phantom killers were now after him. But the breaking point, the point where the whole web collapsed, came back to the poison plot. Do you remember those anonymous letters that were sent to the food contamination companies, claiming that there was something or someone poisoning the food in the community? Well, the police managed to match a fingerprint found on one of those letters to Sef Gonzales. Those letters were evidence of premeditation, months of premeditation. On June the 13th, 2002, 11 months after the murders, detectives arrested Sef Gonzales. He was charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of threatening product contamination. The trial was in April 2004, where Sef pled not guilty to everything. The Crown's case was that this was no professional hit. It was the slaughter of an angry amateur, a young man who was terrified of losing his car, his allowance, his inheritance and his status, and wished to get rid of the one thing in his way, his family. In May 2004, Sef was found guilty on all 4 counts. In September of 2004, the judge hounded down the sentence. He found the murders fall within the worst category of cases of murder, planned for months, committed one by one against his own family, followed by years of lies. 3 life sentences with no parole. The law also barred him from any money. He'd already been refused access to the family estate he had killed for. He appealed, and in 2007 that appeal was granted. It was mainly based on the fact that the evidence or the statement he gave that night to the police, whether that was valid or not, as he was never cautioned. Later that same year, his appeal was dismissed. It was found that there was no miscarriage of justice. He appealed again 3 more times in 2018, 2019 and 2021. All 3 of these appeals have failed. Over those 2 decades, Sef has never admitted to what he did. Now, this is where I usually tell you that the story ends, but unfortunately it doesn't. In 2025, 24 years after the murders, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal granted Sef Gonzales the right to appeal against his life sentences. Not his convictions, his sentence. His argument, as reported by ABC News and others, is built on evidence that he lived with post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from sexual abuse he suffered as a child. Evidence that was never given in the original trial. As I record this, the appeal is still ongoing and making its way through the courts. And the man who murdered his family and sang at their funeral is arguing that life should not mean life. One last thing this case did change. So the family home, their dream house on Collins Street, was up for sale for a long time. And in 2004, a couple bought it. This couple, however, did not know and were never told what happened inside that house. They found out from a newspaper, and the scandal that happened ended up in the courts. And it actually changed the laws on buying and selling homes. Sellers now have to disclose all the facts surrounding a home, any that would matter to a buyer. This formality is now informally known as the Gonzales family legacy. But laws and appeals are not how I want to leave this case. I want to leave you with them. Teddy Gonzales, 46, a man who pulled his son from the rubble of an earthquake, rebuilt his profession from zero in a foreign country, and spent his life opening Australia's door for other families. Mary Loiva Gonzales, 43, a survivor twice over who made a home out of nothing, whose last week alive was spent recovering from what was very likely her own son's first attempt on her life. And Claudine Gonzales, 18 years and 1 day old, the honest child, the one who told the truth about her brother, and I don't doubt for a moment that her honesty is part of why he went into her room first. She should be in her 40s now, with her whole story written. Instead, her story stopped at 1 day past 18. The person Sef showed the world was gentle, devoted and heartbroken. The person underneath planned his family's deaths for months, executed them in hours, and sang over their coffins. If this case teaches you anything, it's that the mask can be very, very good, and that the quiet details, the timeline, the little slips, are where the truth lies. That was the case of the Gonzales family. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment. You can find my podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. As always, take care of each other and press the notification button so that you can join us next time.